And as Steph said, I'm going to talk a bit about how we think about doing educational games. It's going to start a bit more academic, and then hopefully it's going to get a bit more concrete by using some examples from the Global Conflict series. And as Steph said, I tend to move a bit between the academics and the industry. So when I'm overly optimistic, it's the business person speaking, and when I'm very pessimistic, it's the researcher. So now you know. Yeah, and I've done a number of different things. I've done a lot of research projects on educational use of games and worked with it pretty much most of my adult life. Well, it's a very interesting field that I'm going to share a bit about. And the angle that I'm going to take is basically what is really a good learning game and how does that kind of connect with a good game. And I'm going to take a different kind of starting point than the research project that they've done here, because you can say there are different forms of knowledge, there's different types of target groups, and we're targeting older children, and we're targeting what you can call a different kind of knowledge, where the bus type of game, the quiz games, are much more about basic knowledge, factual knowledge, and recall. Then we're trying to use games for learning more complex knowledge, like about how does a conflict work, what are the issues involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, what issues does Latin America faces, and stuff like that. So trying to build a different kind of educational experience than that. And I'm just going to be a bit critical towards, what the kind of traditional way of doing educational games, which has been labeled edutainment for many years, and what I see as the limitations of that approach. And I have this quote that I always start with from Seymour Papert, which is quite a famous, almost philosopher, I guess, the inventor of Mindstorms and Logo out of the US, worked a lot with Lego over the years, trying to find also very instrumental in developing the educational philosophy behind the constructionism. And he has this. He's very, very taken by the potential of using games for educational purposes. But when he kind of looks at what's out there, then he has this quote that states something like, "Most of what goes under the name edutainment reminds me of George Bernard Shaw's response to a famous beauty who speculated on the marvelous child they could have together. With your brains and my looks," he retorted, "but what if the child had my looks and your brains?" And the problem is really that when you look at a lot of the edutainment titles that are out there, you kind of say, okay, if we take a good game and we take education, then we can kind of combine this into an interesting experience. But what very often happens is that you take very conservative and traditional educational principles and you apply that with quite dated, old-fashioned, bad technology from the games industry, and you get quite of a bastard, you can almost call it. And obviously it doesn't have to be like this, but a lot of times this is nevertheless what happens. And some of the problems that these edutainment products suffer from can kind of be boiled down to three different concepts. The first one is what we kind of call that there's a limited extent of intrinsic motivation, which basically means that it refers to a lot of research that was done in the 80s by a guy called Thomas Malone, which did studies about what was the motivating part of games and educational games. And he stressed that, you can have like what you call inner motivation and outer motivation. And inner motivation was basically related to the fact that when you kind of use a game, it's the activity like playing the game, like in Counter-Strike, shooting someone else, running around, getting, being fast. That's kind of motivating by itself. It's an interesting and challenging and engaging activity. Then you have what you can call extrinsic motivation. And that would, again, Counter-Strike, it would be something like, how many did you shoot, what were your frag rate, what did you get on the high score, your friends recognize you for being a good player. So these external rewards that you get for playing the game. And when you look at how most entertainment games work, they actually very much rely on these extrinsic motivation, like a scoring, a high score, being able to print your results, and maybe the game activity itself is really not that interesting a lot of the time. This kind of ties into the next problem that a lot of edutainment titles have, and as edutainment is, I would pretty much like make up 90% of what's out there. This is basically a problem for most educational titles. That most edutainment titles have what you can call like a split between the educational part and the game part. So, and you can kind of recognize this by being able to stick in basically any content into the same game mechanics, and this kind of means that you're not really using the game mechanics to learn something. You're using them as a reward or as a feeder. And again, previous research shows that this is probably works far better than a traditional exercise book or traditional teaching, but it's not as powerful as if you actually integrate the learning principles and the learning experience with the actual game experience. And the very basic example is basically that you have a quiz format where you can basically feed in any content. So, whether you have a quiz format where you ask about math or spelling or anything else, it's the same format you use. And the game format is very much about being fast and reacting, in Bosch, for example. And you can say that the content and the learning experience is not really well integrated into that game experience. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It works very well for some target groups, for some learning areas. But it's not for everything. And the third thing that's very traditional of these edutainment titles is that they rely on what you would call drill and practice learning principles. So it's very basically about doing the same thing again and again, like 2 + 2, 4 + 4, spell this word. And the very kind of repetitive nature, that's very good for skills and training, but has limitations in terms of a wider understanding of what education and learning can be. So what you can say is overall that you can say that edutainment works for some forms of knowledge and some target groups, especially simple, abstract, and self-contained knowledge for pre- and early schools, like spelling, algebra, and geography. So this means that when you have kind of a very kind of contained piece of information, then you can very well use an edutainment format. But if you have more complex issues, and if you look at most of what's on the commercial shelves, then it's a very different approach they take to what games are. They create, you can call, like virtual worlds that you interact with and that you explore. And it's in this kind of virtual world that you learn about different things. So I think that there are room for improvements, and there are rooms for doing different kinds of educational games that we're doing today, and using them for more areas than we traditionally see with edutainment games. And back in 2006, there was this report from the Federation of American Scientists. And I like also to bring this quote most of the time when I give talks, because this federation usually deals with anti-terror, how to use nuclear power to make the world a better place, climate challenges, etc. So things that they find are really, really crucial to make the planet a better place. And in 2006, they spent a lot of time on actually looking at how can we use educational games to revitalize and change our educational system, the way we think and learn, and in that way, obviously, make room for a lot of gains in society in general. And what they stressed was that educational games are fundamentally different than the prevalent instructional paradigm. They are based on challenge, reward, learning through doing, and guided discovery, in contrast to tell and test methods of traditional instruction. And I've added the very small can be, because in principle there is nothing that kind of in the stars that says that when you do an educational game it has